After Sesame Street, it's a hyper-familiar world to me, and I have this childlike ability to ignore the fact that I'm talking to scraps of cloth. Every country I go to, I see posters promoting the film in different languages. Los Muppets, I love that. In America, Miramax are using a New York Times review that said, Trainspotting makes kids look like a 1960s episode of Sesame Street. I look like a Sesame Street character in real life when I wake up, but not like the cute ones, kind of like the ones that look a little rough around the edges. Sesame Street is awesome, not only because they teach, edify, and entertain kids, but because they savvily make it possible to do so with parental engagement. Because the show is loaded with references for mom and dad. I don't really know what it is about vampires that makes them such a powerful symbol, metaphor, whatever in people's consciousness. But I do know they're tremendously powerful. I mean, there's a vampire on Sesame Street, and Count Chocula. I don't know why it's so powerful. When I got to New York, I had no place to sleep. The pay from Sesame Street wasn't enough to rent an apartment. I was staying on people's couches. I stayed in the dressing room until they found out. I stayed with Jim Henson and his family for a week, and I wanted to do that permanently. I didn't dare ask, though. The Tonight Show afforded us the opportunity to work with the Muppets and other Sesame Street characters, and we always had the desire to do something that spoke to young people. I was actually born in New York. We lived there until I was 3, so I grew up watching Sesame Street and hearing the accent. You are a sponge at that age, soaking everything up. What I remember most about working on Sesame Street is having fun in the green room with the other kids while waiting for my time to go on camera to work with the puppets. The way other kids would watch The Little Mermaid or Sesame Street, I would watch Fiddler on the Roof. The Christian kids movies are fun because so many of them are made with low production value, but they're still trying to appeal to a broad audience like a Sesame Street or something. It's always fascinating to see how hidden or obvious they want to make their message. Also, the acting in them can be pretty fun. Ed Miliband looks like a character from Sesame Street. I just think he's terrible. When he says something, I just switch off. With 4 kids, it's hard to watch anything other than Sesame Street. I thought it was quintessentially American, very hip, very late-60s. I was absolutely stunned, and a German production company asked me if I could do a Sesame Street in Germany. It was absolutely the happiest surprise. As a white, female, half-Jewish writer, when I read The Underground Railroad, it reminded me that America isn't just the sort of Sesame Street that I grew up with that tolerated and embraced diversity in the Northeast, but in fact was built on the foundation of slavery. I expect a zombie to show up on Sesame Street soon, teaching kids to count. So, I'm on Sesame Street, walking around with all these monsters, Elmo and his buddies, a whole bunch of chickens, a whole bunch of penguins, and a number 4 dancing about. It was just pure joy, simple, ridiculous fun, stupid joy. There's no irony. Sesame Street is just a crazy great place to be. Over its 40 years, Muppets on Sesame Street have addressed AIDS, divorce, a parent's deployment overseas, and a death in the family. But the show is addressing incarceration in a way it didn't used to, by bringing the show directly to the kids and families it wants to reach. I've gotten to hang out with Elmo. I'm the fairy shoe person on Sesame Street, so hopefully our kids will get to see and hear me as much as they're able. I was watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Sesame Street, Electric Company, Romper Room, and Villa Allegra, when I said to myself, hey, self, wouldn't it be fun to be one of those kids on the TV? My mom thought it was a pretty good idea, too, and she instantly moved us from the Bay Area to Malibu. Nice. It only takes 30 seconds to pluck my eyebrows, but it hurts. I have to tweeze them in the middle once a week. Otherwise, I look like Bert from Sesame Street. I always say I owe my sense of humor to the Muppets because I didn't necessarily know what was going on when I watched The Muppet Show, and obviously, Sesame Street was made just for me. When I did 1, 2, 3, 4 on Sesame Street, they'd rewritten the song and made it about counting. At first, I balked. I was like, counting to 4, that's where we're going with this? Then they sent me appearances by other people like James Blunt doing You're Beautiful as my triangle. The coolest thing I've gotten to do in the past few years is guest star on Sesame Street. I learned my ABCs, 1, 2, 3 from Sesame Street. Sesame Street early on, and then Little House on the Prairie was a big deal in our house. I always identified with Little House, because they were wanderers, and there was something about being an immigrant. There is nothing that Sesame Street can't teach you, if you let it. Other than the Sesame Street soundtrack, which I was obsessed with, the first artist I really felt I discovered on my own was Amy Winehouse. She was the first female artist I wanted to write like and sing like and be like. I was a TV junkie as a kid. I am the Sesame Street generation. I always wanted to be a Muppet. So when Sesame Street approached me to guest star, I thought, I'm going to be on this. It's pretty incredible stuff. I need to study English more. I'll start by watching Sesame Street every day. In Australia, I grew up watching the Mickey Mouse Club, my son grew up watching Sesame Street, my grandson's growing up watching Dora the Explorer. So we are sort of saturated with American culture from the day we're born, and to those who do have an ear for it, it's second nature. For me, the amazing thing was entering into this amazing world of Sesame Street. We'd be in the kids' room, and there was a door into the soundstage that said 1 2 3 open sesame. I remember pushing that door open and going into this incredible magical world of make-believe. In one episode, I was playing football with Joe Namath. We were only allowed to watch Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers and 3 2 1 Contact. Sesame Street was a pioneering educational TV show, intended to help underprivileged children. But even those of us middle-class kids spoilt for pedagogical choice couldn't get enough of it. I remember watching Sesame Street as a kid and loving that there were Latino characters on there. Sesame Street was built on the idea that a show that could capture a child's attention could also give the child an education. That idea turned out to be wildly successful. I directed the play Amadeus, with puppets way back in the day for theater. I also studied puppetry at the Eugene and Neal Center with a lot of the Sesame Street people, so I do have a little bit of a history with puppetry. We've never been squeaky clean from the jump. We've never been Disney or Sesame Street, you know. My first day of high school, I wore brown boys corduroys that my mom had sewn Sesame Street elastic into. They were my coolest pants, and a lime green Patagonia fleece that my mom found at Goodwill. I loved fleece. I understood that without English I would never get far, so my dream was to become a receptionist, and so I started to learn English from watching Sesame Street. Rather than saying, I can't do this, Sesame Street encourages us to say, I can't do this, yet. That one word changes everything. It emphasizes that your capability isn't fixed. It highlights the reality that our brain is like a muscle. My siblings and I, we were raised on TV and films. Not a day went by that we weren't watching one of 3 movies, Caddyshack, Animal House, Beverly Hills Cop, on rotation. Our comedy, our personalities were set watching Sesame Street, these really sort of wacky, Jim Henson-y characters. I really learned the power of the tube on Sesame Street and how it can influence a very young mind. I would watch Sesame Street and see neighborhoods and kids with other kids to play with, and I just didn't have that. You know, we were on a lake. We just didn't have that stuff. My wife is an Olympic gold medalist, WNBA All-Star, Jeopardy! Champion, and Rhodes Scholarship finalist who was sung to by President Clinton, sung about by Ludacris, and serenaded on Sesame Street by a chorus of Muppets. I learned watching Sesame Street how to speak English, and Bert and Ernie were my best friends. I believed in them and I learned from them how to have a healthy and happy relationship. Most people don't hold a job for 45 years. They pass on or want to retire. I don't want to retire. My real goal is to do 50 years on Sesame Street, and I only got 4.5 years to go. Getting a degree, being on Sesame Street, those were like real accomplishments to me. I always wanted to be on Sesame Street, that kind of a thing, puppets and fun and original songs and fairy tales. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.